At 78, I've had time to think about a lot of races. Not just the ones people remember, not just the ones they still show in highlights, but the quiet ones too. The races that stayed with me long after the crowd was gone. The ones that didn't feel like victories even when the results said otherwise. People still ask me the same question: who was the greatest you ever faced? And I understand why they ask it that way. It's an easy question. It sounds clean. It sounds like something you can measure. But the truth is, that was never the question that stayed with me. The real question, the one that lingers when everything else fades, is who was the toughest? And toughest doesn't mean the fastest. It doesn't mean the most decorated. It doesn't even mean the man who beat you the most times. The toughest are the ones who made you feel something shift in the middle of a race. The ones who took you out of your rhythm without touching you. The ones who made you doubt something you had always trusted about yourself. I remember moments where I felt in control. I knew my pace, I knew my body, I knew exactly when I was going to move. And then without warning, something would change. Not dramatic, not obvious, just enough. Just enough to make you realize you weren't dictating anything anymore. That's what stays with you. There are 5 names I keep coming back to. Different countries, different styles, different kinds of pressure. Some people will expect them, some might not, but each one in their own way took something from me out there on the track. And once something like that is taken from you, you don't get it back the same way again. Let me start with Peter Snell, because in many ways he was already there before I ever understood what I was stepping into. We weren't friends. In those days, you didn't really build relationships across continents like that, not in the middle of a career, but you knew who mattered. You watched, you paid attention, and Peter Snell was one of those names that carried weight even before you lined up on the same track. He represented something complete, something already figured out. What stood out about him wasn't raw speed, not in the way people usually talk about it. It was the control. When he ran, it never felt rushed, never forced. There was a patience to it that almost made you uncomfortable, like he was holding something back that you couldn't see yet. You'd be moving, thinking the pace made sense, thinking you understood where the race was going, and somehow you were already inside his rhythm without realizing it. That was the feeling. You weren't chasing him, you were adjusting to him. The problem started with how he managed energy, not just physically, but mentally. Most runners, especially at that level, rely on moments, a surge, a reaction, a decision. Snell didn't race like that. He built the race piece by piece. Every lap had a purpose. Every movement fit into something larger. And by the time you realized what he was doing, you were already committed to a pace that didn't belong to you. I remember watching him closely around the time of the Tokyo Olympic cycle, not just the races themselves, but the way they unfolded. The final laps didn't look explosive. They looked inevitable. That's what made it different. There was no panic, no visible strain, just a gradual tightening of the race until there was nowhere left to go. And that changes how you think. Because when you're young, especially when you're coming up the way I did, you believe speed can solve most things. You believe if you're strong enough, fast enough, you can take control whenever you need to. Watching Snell forced me to reconsider that. It showed me that control isn't something you grab in the moment. It's something you build before the moment ever arrives. There were races where I felt good, strong, ready. I knew what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. And then I'd find myself hesitating. Not because I was tired, not because I was beaten physically, but because something didn't feel right about the timing. Like I was stepping into a space that had already been shaped by someone else. That hesitation is small. But at that level, small is everything. Snell didn't overwhelm you. He didn't break you in an obvious way. He just took away your certainty. And once that's gone, you're not the same runner anymore, at least not in that race. That's why he was tough. Not because he was faster in a straight line, but because he made you question whether you even understood the race you were in. And once you start asking that question in the middle of a race, you're already behind. But he wasn't the only one who could take a race away from you before you even realized it. The one that stays with me the most, the one people still bring up every time my name comes up, is Kip Kano. We didn't talk much. There was respect there always, but it was quiet. You didn't need words to understand what you were dealing with. You could feel it the moment he stepped onto the track. There was no hesitation in him, no waiting to see how things would unfold. He came in already decided. That's what made it different. With most runners, you're reading the race as it develops. You adjust, you react. There's a rhythm to that exchange, even at the highest level. With Kano, that rhythm was gone. He didn't give you time to settle into anything. From the start, he was asking a question you weren't ready to answer yet. The problem started with his pace. Not just that it was fast, but where it came from. He didn't build into it, he imposed it. Right from the early stages, the race felt stretched, like it was being pulled in a direction that didn't suit you. And once you're pulled out of your natural rhythm, everything else starts to slip. Your breathing changes, your timing changes, even your confidence shifts a little, and that's all it takes. I remember the final in Mexico City, 1968. I had trained for that moment. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew how I wanted the race to unfold. And for a while, it felt like it was there. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't chasing. I was in it. Then something changed. Not a dramatic move, not a sudden burst that the crowd reacts to, just a shift. Kano moved earlier than expected. He didn't wait for the race to come back to him. He went and took it. And in that moment, you had a choice: go with him or trust your plan. I hesitated. It wasn't long, just a fraction, but at that level, that's enough, because when I tried to respond, it wasn't the same anymore. The gap wasn't huge, it wasn't impossible, but it was just far enough that everything started to feel different. The effort wasn't controlled anymore, it was forced. And when you're forcing it, you're already losing something. What made Kano so difficult wasn't just his strength or his endurance, it was his willingness to break the structure of the race. He didn't care what was expected. He didn't care how it was supposed to go. He made the race happen on his terms, and if you couldn't adapt instantly, you paid for it. That day, I felt it clearly. I was still running hard, still pushing, but I wasn't dictating anything anymore. I was reacting, and that's a very different place to be, especially in an Olympic final. You don't forget moments like that, because it's not just about being beaten. It's about realizing that for a brief stretch of time, someone else understood the race better than you did. And when that happens on the biggest stage, it stays with you. That wasn't the hardest part, though. That wasn't the hardest part, though, because sometimes it's not the man who breaks the race open, it's the one who never lets it break at all. That's what it felt like running against Michel Jazzi. We came from different systems, different philosophies of running. In the United States, there was always a sense of structure, of building toward a moment where the race would be decided. With Jazzi, it didn't feel like there was a single moment to target. It felt like the entire race was already balanced in a way you couldn't disrupt. I remember watching him the first time and thinking it looked almost too easy. His stride didn't fight the track, it flowed over it. There was no visible strain, no wasted movement, nothing that suggested he was close to his limit. And that's a difficult thing to deal with as a competitor, because when someone looks like they're working, you can read them. You can wait for the sign, the moment where something gives. With him, there was nothing to read. The problem started with his rhythm, not just consistent, but controlled in a way that made your own rhythm feel unstable. You'd match it for a while, try to sit in that same pattern, and it would seem manageable. Then you'd realize you were adjusting more than you thought. Shortening your stride here, quickening your turnover there, all small changes that slowly pulled you away from your natural race. And once you're no longer running your own race, you're already in trouble. There were races in the mid-60s where I came in feeling strong, confident in my ability to dictate terms. I'd settle in, find my pace, and for a few laps, it would feel right. Then I'd look over and Jazzi would be there, not pressing, not attacking, just present, always within reach, never overextending. And that presence, it builds pressure in a different way, because it forces you to ask a question you don't want to ask yet. If he's this comfortable now, what happens later? I remember one race in particular where I tried to change the pattern. I thought if I could disrupt that rhythm early, maybe I could force something out of him. I moved sooner than I normally would have, pushed the pace, tried to stretch the field. For a moment, it felt like it might work. Then I heard him, not struggling, not fading, just there, matching step for step like nothing had changed at all. And that's when it hits you. Not all at once, but gradually. The realization that whatever you're doing, he's already prepared for it. By the time the final stretch came, it wasn't about speed anymore. It was about who had spent less trying to break the other. And in that kind of race, he was always in control. What made Jazzi so tough wasn't something you could point to on paper. It wasn't a single move or a single strength. It was the way he removed the urgency from the race while keeping you under constant pressure. You were never safe, but you were never given a clear moment to act either. That kind of tension wears on you because you start to doubt your instincts. You hesitate where you normally wouldn't. And in a race decided by fractions, hesitation is everything. He didn't overpower you. He didn't outkick you in a dramatic way. He just stayed until staying was enough. And once you've been in a race like that, you understand something different about competition. Sometimes the hardest opponent isn't the one who takes control away from you. It's the one who never gives you a reason to take it back. And then came a different kind of pressure, not from across the world, not from a style you had to study from a distance, but from someone who knew exactly how you raced because he had been right there with you. That's what it felt like lining up against Jim Grelle. We came through the same system, same track, same meets, same expectations. There's a familiarity in that, but there's also something else that comes with it. When someone knows your habits, your timing, the way you like to build a race, they don't have to guess. They don't have to react late. They're already where they need to be before you even make the move. Grelle wasn't loud. He didn't draw attention to himself the way some runners did, but he had a presence that stayed with you through every lap. You'd settle into your pace, try to focus on your own rhythm, and somehow he was always there. Not pushing, not forcing anything, just close enough that you couldn't ignore him. The problem started with his patience. Most runners reveal something over the course of a race. A moment where they press, a moment where they hesitate, something you can read and respond to. With Grelle, those moments didn't come easily. He waited, he watched, and the longer he stayed with you, the more you started to feel like you were the one being studied. I remember races at the national level where I felt strong from the start. I'd take control early, set the pace the way I wanted, and for a while it felt clean, controlled, exactly how I had planned it. Then I'd sense him behind me, not fading, not drifting, just there. And that does something to you because it makes you question whether your pace is enough, whether you've done enough to separate. You start thinking about your move earlier than you should. You start wondering if you need to change something before it's time. And once you start adjusting like that, you're no longer running freely. There was one race where I decided I wasn't going to wait. I pushed the pace harder earlier than usual, tried to break things open before the final stretch. For a moment, I thought I had created space. The field stretched, the rhythm changed, and it felt like I had taken control. Then I heard the steps again, not rushed, not desperate, just steady. And in that moment, it became clear that I hadn't broken anything. I had only made the race harder on myself because now I had to carry that effort all the way through, and he hadn't spent the same energy to stay with me. By the time we reached the closing stages, it wasn't about who could run faster anymore. It was about who had managed the race better, who had stayed patient, who had avoided unnecessary decisions. And that's where Grelle was dangerous. He didn't need to dominate the race. He just needed to stay close enough that you never felt comfortable, close enough that every decision you made felt like it was being answered immediately. What made him tough wasn't a single move or a single strength. It was the constant presence, the feeling that no matter what you tried, you weren't alone in that race. And when you're never alone, you never fully settle. That kind of pressure doesn't show up on the clock, but you feel it in every step. And sometimes that's harder than anything else. And then there was one more name, one that shaped the way I thought about running long before I ever had the chance to test myself against him. And then there was one more name, not someone I stood shoulder to shoulder with in an Olympic final at the peak of his power, but someone who was already shaping the way I understood the sport before I even realized it. Herb Elliot wasn't just another runner to measure against. He was something else entirely. When you're young, you look at results, times, medals, records. You think that's where the answers are. But every now and then there's an athlete who makes you look beyond that. Elliot had that effect. It wasn't just that he won. It was how completely he seemed to own the race from beginning to end. The first thing that stayed with me was his stride. Long, controlled, almost deliberate in a way that made everything else look rushed. There was no searching in his movement, no hesitation between phases of the race. It felt like he had already decided how it would unfold before the gun even went off. And when a runner carries himself like that, it changes the atmosphere of the race before it even begins. The problem started with that certainty. Most races, even at the highest level, have moments of doubt. You feel it in yourself and you look for it in others. A slight tightening in the shoulders, a change in breathing, something that tells you the race is still open. With Elliot, that moment never seemed to come. Watching him, you didn't feel like you were waiting for an opportunity. You felt like you were already late. I spent time studying his races, going back over them, trying to understand where the opening was, where someone could have challenged him, forced him into a different rhythm. But the more I watched, the clearer it became that the race wasn't being decided in a single move. It was decided by the absence of doubt, by the fact that he never gave anyone a reason to believe he could be beaten. That belief matters more than people realize. Because once you step onto a track thinking you might not be able to take control, you've already lost something. Not your strength, not your conditioning, but your timing, your willingness to commit fully to a move without hesitation. And hesitation, even for a fraction of a second, is enough at that level. There were moments in my own races where I tried to run with that same sense of authority, to dictate, to commit, to remove the question before it could even be asked. And sometimes for stretches it worked. The pace felt right, the rhythm held, and for a while everything stayed under control. But sustaining that, that's where it becomes difficult. Because control isn't just about leading, it's about holding that belief when your body starts to push back, when the race tightens, when every instinct tells you to wait just a little longer. Elliot didn't seem to have that hesitation, or if he did, he never showed it. What made him tough for me wasn't a single race or a single moment. It was the standard he set before I ever had the chance to test myself against him. He changed the way I thought about what it meant to dominate a race, not just win it. He didn't take something from me in the way the others did, but he forced me to confront something earlier than I was ready for. The idea that the race could be decided before the final lap, before the final move, before you even felt the need to act. And once you understand that, you never look at a race the same way again. Looking back now, it was never really about the medal, not in the way people think. The medal is what the world remembers. But for me, it's always been those moments inside the race when something shifts and you realize you're not as in control as you believed. Each of those men showed me a different version of that feeling. Not all at once, not in the same way, but enough to leave a mark that never really fades. There were races where I felt ready, strong, certain, and still somewhere along the way something small would change. A hesitation, a move that came just a fraction too late. And at that level, that's all it takes. You don't get time to fix it. You don't get a second chance in that moment. The race keeps moving, and you either go with it or you fall behind. That's what stays with you. Not the noise, not the result, but the quiet realization right there in the middle of it that someone else understood the moment better than you did. And maybe that's what the Olympics really are, not victory. But the truth about who you are when everything is on the line,